Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. The year was 2006 when the bodies of 4 murdered women turned up in a drainage ditch behind a motel in Egg Harbor Township, the town over from Atlantic City. All of the women's heads faced east and they were all posed, with their shoes and socks missing and each laying approximately 60 feet apart. 2 members of the public called in to report the grisly discovery of bodies and investigators arrived to secure the scene. It wouldn't be long after this that autopsies and identification of the women would be carried out. All of the women were identified. They were all involved in the local drug scene, and 3 of the 4 women were confirmed to have been prostitutes. The women had been murdered via asphyxiation, and all 4 of the women had been murdered within the space of just 1 month, between October and November. In this episode of the Serial Killer series, I'll be going over this case and looking at potential suspects and some theories. The case is troublesome and the killer is still at large as of the time of this video. I hope you enjoy. Atlantic City is a city in New Jersey. Today it is most well known for its casinos and people flock to Atlantic City for a good time. Many well-known celebrities, political figures and criminals have touched down in Atlantic City over the years. Some of these individuals include Donald Trump and Al Capone. The beaches are what initially drew in American families way back in the 1870s. The American dream wouldn't be complete without a much needed break from it all after all, and what better place to vacation to than Atlantic City. For 50 years, the city saw much growth and opportunity. The Roaring Twenties saw its fair share of this prosperity as prohibition was virtually non-existent in Atlantic City. Organised crime had a hold over law enforcement and alcohol bans were disregarded. Tourism was the main moneymaker, and for Atlantic City, this was both a blessing and a curse. Following World War II, a significant downward spiral took place in Atlantic City. Unemployment rose in the city, and the introduction of commercial travel didn't help much either. The city quickly became run down, and many tourists stopped visiting completely. In the 1970s, casinos were introduced to attempt to attract tourists and pull them back. This worked for a while, but like with any roll of the dice, you can win or lose, and Atlantic City ultimately lost. The bright lights of the casinos attempted to conceal the shady activity that went down in the real Atlantic City, a place where many people are on the fringes and struggle with substance abuse and a lack of hope. Unemployment is high, and many people are desperate and hurting. The murdered women came from different walks of life, but ultimately ended up in the same vicious cycle of substance abuse and needing quick money to feed their habits. Molly Jean Dilts was only 20 when she left her hometown after her mother and brother both died. Although she didn't have a record for sex work, investigators were confident that she ended up in the same profession and was the first woman to fall victim to the Eastbound Strangler. Barbara Brador, age 42, a former cocktail waitress, had turned to sex work and was doing this to fund her cocaine habit. She was last seen in October. Kim Raffo, a former waitress, had left her husband and kids because of her substance problems. Kim ended up selling her body to fund her habit. And finally, Tracy Ann Roberts, age 23, a former stripper who used sex work to fund her habit. Tracy was last seen in November. All 4 women would turn up deceased in a very bizarre manner, and it wasn't long before possible suspects began to emerge. One of these was the handyman from the motel in front of the drainage ditch. His girlfriend had called police to say that he was the murderer. Police delved deeper into his background, and upon conducting a search of his room at the motel, they found photographs of his girlfriend's teenage daughter undressing. The man was ruled out from the case because DNA recovered from the crime scene did not provide a match. More suspect names would come and go as the investigation reached a standstill. Another one of these suspects, who had a history of drug offences and knew 2 of the victims, was looked into by the police. He was Muslim and was initially a prime suspect because Muslims faced east toward Mecca during prayer. However, investigators soon ruled him out as a suspect. Despite not having anyone in custody, investigators had a good idea of who they were looking for. An accurate profile of the type of offender that was responsible was compiled, given the years of research and study into serial killers. John Kelly, a well-known criminal profiler, put this together in 2006. And these are just some of the things that he listed in the profile. The killer is a local man, a sexually motivated offender who returned to the crime scene to relive the strangulations. The killer is ritualistic and takes the victim's footwear after death, as he wants crime trophies, but also because he has a foot fetish. He is organised, methodical and power-hungry. He has killed before and likely has a history of physical or sexual abuse toward women, either perpetrating this against a partner or a prostitute. The offender is narcissistic, majorly concerned with how he's seen by society and the facade that he's presenting to those around him. He would have spoken openly about how bad prostitution is, especially in Atlantic City, and the city's reputation being tarnished by them. Before I get into the final suspect that I feel like is worth mentioning, I'll give my thoughts on the case being related to the Long Island case. I don't really feel like they're connected. In the Atlantic City case, the killer wanted the victims to be discovered. They were in plain view, not concealed in dense brush. The Long Island killer went so far as to dismember his earlier victims, and the later victims were all hidden along a road at night, a place where you wouldn't have been looking for any bodies. The victims were contacted via Craigslist in the Long Island case, or at least the final 4 women, as the killer had evolved his methods by this stage. The killer controlled them during phone conversations and was very discreet, whereas the Eastbound Strangler picked up his victims on the street, which is very different. Now, for the final suspect who I'll be mentioning. His name is Dennis Gaskill. He is a former New Jersey trucker and gun runner. He died in November 2010 of suicide, specifically asphyxiation, while sitting in an Indiana jail. He had been arrested in September at a gun show as he attempted to steal guns from vendors. He resisted arrest and was facing felony charges for attempting to disarm law enforcement and for receiving stolen property. Gaskill has a long criminal history and lived in Egg Harbor Township, where he had stashed 70 stolen guns. He was estranged from his wife as they were working out a divorce, and he sounded pretty transient, apart from the fact that he was a trucker, a role that is transient in nature. Creepy drawn pictures of women appearing as if they're being strangled have been found in a tyre miles from the crime scene. Gaskill had also drawn similar pictures, and many believe that he could have drawn the ones hidden in the tyre. Also hidden in the tyre was a high-heeled shoe along with women's clothing. Again, these may not belong to Gaskill, but it's a possibility worth considering. Even more bizarre was the fact that Gaskill had been found to have a goat in his truck upon his arrest, and he was likely having relations with said goat. Yes, this guy was very strange. In conclusion, the women whose lives were tragically taken have not seen any justice. Without anyone to be held accountable, life goes on without any concrete end to the story. Could Gaskill have been the real killer? Or was it someone who just fled Atlantic City following the murders and relocated to a new city to continue killing women? Whatever the outcome, hopefully more answers will eventually come to light in the near future. This has been another episode of the Serial Killer series. As always, thank you for watching.